15th of February. Apologies for absence.
One apology, Chair, from Councillor Spate.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare that they are interesting? So,
I'm a member of the Scrutiny panel, so on the procurement front, I won't be participating.
thank you very much. Okay, that's all. Urgent items, not agreed to the consideration of any urgent items. Update of procurement of strategic delivery partner for housing works. Evelina, are you kicking off and offering a précis, or Alice, are you just diving straight in? Please do.
Thank you, Councillor. So the report in front of you sort of sets out how we've been progressing on the path around that procurement that was published in December last year. So this is just an update with actually no actions sort of deriving from it, but it's to update the committee. So as we published the tender notice, the contract notice on the 15th of December, there was a number of interested parties who registered interest initially, and that was sort of building on the work that we've previously done around market engagement prior to publication. And so during the process, we were obviously quite well informed that we would have actually be getting a number of bidders come forward. Unfortunately, it sort of started to materialise a bit more that the contractors who started registering interest become a little bit more concerned around the actual model itself, and it's pretty much predicated around the fact that the risk profile involved in it from their concept. And so what it really sort of boiled down to was the very fact that they didn't really understand the full concept of it. So what we've done is on the 12th of January, we actually held a supplementary briefing session for potential bidders. And what that was done to was to listen to the concerns that they were raising and potentially why they might not be interested in bidding for the procurement itself. Off the back of that session, because it's all obviously a very transparent process and they have to submit queries through to us on the procurement portal, of which they continue to do, we started to get a sort of feel in relation to what the actual issues that they were concerned with. So off the back of that, we had to make a decision in respect of which we could address those fears that the market had, because obviously we have to listen to those. The way in which you write documentation, contract documentation, is written in a very certain way, in which obviously for us as a client it protects us. But clearly, if there's no bidders going to come to the table, then it's not going to work. But the actual underlying fact is there wasn't a real issue that we couldn't overcome within the actual concerns that they had. It was really about understanding. For a lot of the bidders, they didn't understand Thurrock, they didn't understand our housing stock and the performance of that. And the risk involved within the model that they perceived was actually we might be handing something over to them that was in a very dire state, and that's just simply not the case. So what we ended up doing was issuing a tender briefing note. Tender briefing note was drafted by members of the Thurrock team in consultation with our consulting partners that we've got working on this. And what it done was to seek to address all of the matters that are set out under 3.2 within the report. And so that done that, and then we also held a in-person briefing session, which was held in the council chambers, face-to-face, on the 31st of January. And a number of prospective bidders come to that session. And what we done within that session was really went through the performance of the housing stock, what our housing stock looked like, etc., what it make up, and the level of investment that's gone into our stock. And also we have a significant volume of data in relation to the performance of our stock around repairs, voids, compliance, damp and mould and disrepair, etc. So it really painted the picture that actually our housing stock is in good order in that respect, and so we're not just looking to offset a real risk over to a provider. Clearly there's some material alterations, which again is set out in the report around. We've actually included more Thurrock staff within the new structure as well of what we're going to propose. And some of that is listening to the fears that some of them had in relation to actually there being a strong clienting function. So the team that's looking to be retained in Thurrock moving forward under the new model would just be a sort of centralised core competent team of highly qualified officers to manage the contract. And so Off the back of that, we had to then extend the procurement notice just to give bidders more time in relation to obviously the changes for them to work their way through them, and also make sure that them and their stakeholders were happy. And so that the new deadline is now the 23rd of February. At that point, the selection questionnaire stage will close, and we will actually know how many bidders are going to be interested in proceeding to the next stage of the procurement exercise. At the moment, we've not had the same level of concern sort of come forward through the procurement portal, so we're more in a more comfortable place that actually we've achieved the outcome that we're looking to seek in terms of giving that level of clarity to bidders. So that's essentially the main update of what we've got. As I say, the 23rd of January is going to be the next key milestone for us. We actually know the number of bidders we've got to take through to the next stage. February. Yes, thank you. And that is everything apart from any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Questions, comments? Councillor Redsell.
Thank you. I think I asked most of my questions this afternoon, but just, Alistair, do you envisage any of the people that are coming forward dropping out because of?
Thank you, Councillor. I honestly couldn't answer that question based on the engagement session that we had with them face to face. They were a lot more reassured. They did ask questions during that, and so we think we've done everything we obviously can, and the initial feedback has been very good. As I say, because it's a transparent procurement exercise, we clearly can't talk to them now to ask them their intentions. But no, we're reasonably assured as we can do that the model is still in a good place to proceed.
Thanks, Alistair.
Alistair, under 3.2, you've listed all the different issues that prospective bidders have raised. Some of them are the types of issues that you get with any procurement. TUPE concerns, the timetable for tender concerns, you'll get that in virtually every procurement. Some of the concerns are far more fundamental, whether or not the capital budget is sufficient, whether or not the indexing of profit to KPIs was appropriate. Those are far more fundamental concerns. Is there going to be a stage at which there's a senior conversation along the lines of whether or not we believe that the model we're going out for is actually a sustainable model? Because they are more specific concerns regarding whether or not people actually want to be in this market with us. And as much as we want to find a good bidder, I'm not convinced we want to find a good bidder and the bid itself become unstable, even if we're happy with the person who is tendering.
Thank you. So the aspect around the sufficiency of the capital budget is one of those where some of the bidders who have no knowledge of Thurrock and the state of our stock as it currently sits, clearly we'll publish what our capital budget is in future years, because it's going to be sort of worked through concurrently with the provider. So in terms of us setting out the level of investment that's gone into our stock and the current state of repair it's in, we have pacified that to a certain degree. I think it's always going to be an open question of whether a capital budget is going to be enough and sufficient for the next theme, because clearly things materialise in year anyway, don't they? So, issue with concrete, fire safety, etc., that can come up in year. So it's always going to be a genuine concern. It was a genuine concern that they raised. We've done everything we can to sort of show how we allocate our capital spend at the moment, and that's based on active data that we've got within the housing portfolio at the moment around the condition of our stock. But also the model includes the provision of a new stock condition survey in the first year and a new sustainability study in the first year, which will really enhance our level of understanding of the stock investment needs in future years, of which has given them a lot of comfort that actually they'll have a better understanding and a better sort of knowledge. But clearly with the in-house Thurrock team, we will work closely with them to derive the initial capital programme anyway, and future capital programmes will be based on stock condition analysis. Sorry, the other point that you mentioned.
KPIs being linked to profit calculations.
Thank you. So that point was probably one of the most difficult points to overcome. So the way in which the model was actually built was if they fail to achieve compliance around housing stock, and then we're talking about safety matters with our housing stock, which we place the utmost of importance. If they didn't achieve 100% of that, that directly impacted their quarterly profit margin under the model. That was an area of issue for them because some of the things that they were raising that they may not be in control of, and that could be access to residents' home, etc. So we have relaxed that slightly, but not completely. So we've moved more towards a sort of monthly, but it's also not 100%. And so some of the finer detail of that will now be discussed in dialogue stage, which is one of the procurement stages, so we can actually really define that as it sort of moves forward. But that was really the fact that they weren't fully in control of some of the, as I say, gaining access to residents' homes, so around that compliance piece. But it's something that we place to the utmost importance, and we will continue to do so through the model.
Thanks, Alistair. Could you just reassure committee that if we're having flexible conversations where they're saying we're uncomfortable with some of the profits being linked to KPIs and we're amending the goalpost slightly to try and come to an accommodation, what can you give us in terms of reassurance that we are not overly flexing ourselves to ensure that a prospective bidder does fully go forward in the process to the point that we've ended up too far adrift from where we wanted to be with regards to performance-related pay?
It's an absolutely key point because we absolutely will not just concede all parameters just to get a bidder through and get them procured. Obviously, as I say, the safety of our residents and the sort of delivery of the services they receive is going to have to be a conversation, and that's why we have a working group on this as well, to make sure all are very clear on actually where them goalposts are. And our legal advisors, our external legal advisors, are also party to all these conversations as well. As I say, some of the finer detail obviously will be worked on once we get through to that stage, but the main premise of what we've set up today hasn't changed with what we've actually done under these amendments, but clearly, we don't know what bidders are going to say in the future, but we absolutely will not be making a lot of concessions just to get procurement exercise through.
And I appreciate you need to be flexible within the process, but I assume when you get to the end of the process, you'll be able to spell out to members the amendments that you have made, the concessions that you have granted, and why those concessions have been granted. So we will be able to get reassurance at that stage, won't we?
That's right. I mean, the purpose of those update reports is, as you might be aware, Councillor, we are taking those update reports to Cabinet now on a monthly basis. So we obviously update the sort of the evolution of the model and where we're going with it. So this there is absolutely total transparency around where we're going and how we're doing it. I think on the wider point, if we get to a point that we don't think that there is enough interest or there is enough of a competition for the contract, we will absolutely rethink that, and that's on our kind of risk matrix, and we have got sort of plan B, plan C, all that. Secondly, if we carry on but we end up with something that we didn't really want in the first place, again, we have got plans for that as well. So we're not going to just be driven by what the market is telling us. I think lastly, why I sort of put my hand up, I wanted just to note that, interestingly, the people that we spoke to during those engagement sessions from the delivery end, so those that would actually be doing the doing, they were not that worried about the performance, the KPI and the profits, because they actually deliver that sort of services on the ground and they think they can do it. Where the stumbling blocks really started appearing are the shareholders and stakeholders of those companies, because that is where the approval is done for bidding or for entering into contract, and that's where the risk was being sort of debated more, as opposed to the kind of the delivery partners or delivery contractors that would actually be doing the doing, because obviously they're more on the ground, they know the sort of the nature of the work, and they know this is absolutely all possible. So that that has got to be understood as well. Thank you.
I appreciate the answer, as long as we can see the changes that we made to KPIs before we go forward. Councillor Lydiard?
Thanks, Jim. Just wondering, do we have the contract we have? Was it Luminol or Lumisol? Lumisol. Is that a fixed fee, or is it sort of extending according to how long we take over this project?
No, that is a fixed fee because the timeline for the procurement is still set. So even though we've done an extension to the SQ stage, the end date is still the end date because that ties in with the end of the MEARS contract at the moment.
The other thing that I suppose I'm a little bit concerned about is that it feels that this type of contract that we're putting out is not very common, and maybe even a one-off. And I would feel much more comfortable if I knew what other local authorities which other local authorities had this type of contract. And I know a lot of these visits, you know, you go along and people say, oh yes, it's wonderful and everything, but it just helps you to sort of realise that, yeah, they've been working with this contract for a year, no obvious problems, just gives you a level of comfort that I don't really have at the present moment.
Thank you. So there is a neighbouring borough in Basildon that have done a model similar, but it doesn't go to the same degree. And you're right in pointing out that there's not a local authority out there probably going to this extent. This type of model is more commonly seen in sort of facility management commercial world. But as I say, there's iterations of this. It's just this is probably one of the first where this would be a sort of fully encompassing of both across revenue and capital, and there'll be more responsibility put within an external contracting partner. That is true to say, but through one of the working groups, we did have a colleague from one of the neighbouring boroughs speak to us on their model from Basildon. If there's something you want to touch on again or visit, then I'm sure we could discuss that.
Councillor Lydiard, you happy?
Yes, thank you, yeah.
Councillor Edsel.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alistair. Just a couple of questions, really. Most of the contractors that have applied, do they run other councils in whatever area they're in? And obviously, we spoke this afternoon about the get-out clause. We didn't go too much into that, but is that watertight, that get-out clause? That we must have something in place before they're in?
So on the termination, there is a no-fault termination clause within the contract that the council would be able to enact should it come to that stage. So that absolutely will not change, and it will be in there. And so, sorry, what was the...
Contractors do they run other councils?
So the contractors running other councils, the contractors in the sector, there is normally a distinct discipline around whether they do sort of more the responsive repairs or the main capital investment, but the two have started to bleed into each other quite a lot recently. But as I said to Councillor Lydiard, there's not many out there that are currently doing this all encompassing, but there's many areas of the business that are growing at the moment where they are starting to doing more repairs on reactive and capital side concurrently. But the model what we're proposing, where we are looking to TUPE staff out to the contractor and having a much smaller in-house direct team, is quite new.
Just that worried me a little bit. Evelina said shareholders, because when you start to think of shareholders, then you think they're going to placate them rather than us. You know, so I would err on the side of worrying a bit of that. That would worry me slightly with shareholders. Have we got any clarity on that?
No, because as Evelina said, it's really the main concern coming down from the people who financially back the business, and that's why the key point around the linking KPIs to profit, it's something that we're really concerned them. But for us, it's not going to be a big concession point for us, because ultimately we're looking to provide the best service to our residents and maintain safe homes. So there's always got to be a line there that can't be crossed.
Any final questions? Thank you very much, Alistair. Wonderful, thank you. Right, moving on. Homelessness update. Christopher, are you diving straight in, or Evelina, are you? Where you go, Christopher?
Okay, yeah. So I'm sure you've all read it. or at least seen snippets. It's really just to give an overview of the year and risks coming up and risks that we've already experienced and continue to experience around homelessness and the expenditure therein. So we have seen a 22% increase in homelessness demand over the course of the year, with commensurate increases in the need to provide temporary accommodation. Effectively, we're going through what nationwide is being gone through, which is a bit of a perfect storm at both ends of the homelessness system, which is that there's an ever-increasing demand at one end and an ever-diminishing supply at the other end, with which to address it. That added to issues around encroachment from other local authorities, largely those from the capital, and landlord flight as a result of inflationary pressures and rent increases that are part and parcel of that issue, mean that not only are the numbers of properties we can discharge into decreasing in the local area, but the ones that are available are more expensive, and until April we won't see a local housing allowance increase to help us to match those rents for those more vulnerable tenants of residents of ours who approach us and rely on benefits to pay their rent. As the report says, you know, the difference between LHA rates and private rents continues to increase, and on average the cheapest private rental is still around about 5% more expensive than the average social rent in the borough from our RSLs. So it does make for very difficult reading, it makes for very difficult financial concerns as well, with us projecting an overspend for the year, which is relatively significant. But the report does go into details about how we're attempting to mitigate some of those things. So we have diversified our methods of incentivising landlords to give us their properties for discharge, by introducing a rent insurance scheme, which can be used either in conjunction with or in addition to the standard incentive scheme that we use. We've also looked to mitigate temporary accommodation costs, which have been increasing, by entering into block leases rather than continuing consistent single unit spot purchase. We've been successful in getting 4 so far in the financial year, one of which is already, based on last year's expenditure, given us a saving of a few £1,000s for the next 12 months. So we are looking at those things. There are some other mitigations around the way that we deal with being slightly tighter on our legal obligations. So where a person may not meet the threshold for interim accommodation when they first approach us, whereas previously we would be much more flexible, we're being a little tighter on it. Not to say that we're not balancing that out. So certain categories of people we maintain our flexibility. So, for example, we have worked with children's services around care leavers. Care leavers over the age of 21 standard are not automatically considered to be priority need in housing legislation, but working alongside those colleagues, we've put things in place to ensure that we do provide them with temporary accommodation and that there's joint funding available for any private rented sector discharge we can find. Also around adult social care and those who need support that we can provide in accommodation, which is working hand in hand with the new complex housing intervention project, the enhanced housing first and the continuation of the standard housing first. So, and finally, we have obviously put into purchase a further 20 properties of temporary accommodation, the income from which has been a boon for us this year and helped us with our budgets, and also does provide higher quality accommodation that we manage for those households that need it most. But that is reliant on government allowing us to borrow and use right to buy receipts. All in all, it is a difficult picture, but we are taking the steps that we can to try to mitigate against it.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Who would like to lead off? Councillor Redso?
Chris, is it Chris?
Yes.
I can't, it's from the other way, so I can't.
It's Christopher on my
slightly.
screen.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's Christopher on the
We don't get
system,
that,
but yeah.
We don't get it up there, do we? We don't get it on
Put
there.
your
So
name up.
You can call me whatever
that's
you like,
important,
Councillor.
isn't it? I'll leave that up there. Crikey. Just, is it still in place that in children's services, when children are foster cared, and they go to university, they can come back to their foster carers? They don't have to leave that home. They can come back.
I
Is
believe
that still
so,
in
yes.
place?
Yes, it is still in place that they are. It's the same rule that applies to most households. So if someone's only going away to study, they're still classed as being resident with the household. So yes.
Do we actually know how many homeless people there are, ward by ward, or not?
On a ward by ward basis, no, because our homeless households can come from anywhere. They don't necessarily come from Thurrock.
So we're
People
not
can
just actually talking about people sleeping rough.
No, we're talking about actual
Yeah.
homelessness. So the
Yeah.
general overarching definition of homelessness. So they can come from anywhere. You're allowed to apply to the local authority of your choice.
Because you've got rough sleepers in the...
Yeah, there's a specific section in there because we get specific grant funding to deal with rough
Yeah.
sleepers, and we are doing new projects on that. We just got some new funding to get an HMO to try and address our most entrenched rough sleepers.
That's why I asked, do we know if we've got anybody that's actually living on the street at the moment? I know we've had the man who's died recently in Stanford-le-Hope, didn't we?
Over Christmas,
Yeah, so...
we have, at the moment, 6 verified rough sleepers, of whom 5 we're trying to get into that HMO. And we have a number of unverified because we haven't been able to find them or verify that they're from the area. The 6 verified rough sleepers, of them, those 5 are quite entrenched and have refused help previously. The other one, we have linked them in with all the various services, and we're trying to cajole them into allowing us to help. But our numbers have never gone above, well, not never, but have very rarely gone above double figures. We were inspected, well, not inspected, but we had a face-to-face meeting with DLUC only a few weeks ago, where they were quite happy with how we're doing. So we are keeping those numbers down.
Lovely, thank you.
Councillor Cheney?
Press me back. Thank you. Chris, can you tell me, do we give priority to people who live within Thurrock, have lived within Thurrock?
We have no right to do so. The law states, unfortunately, that we have to take an application from anyone who comes from anywhere. We can, if they don't have a local connection here, refer them back to an authority where they do, but it's not a statutory duty to do so. We do try to do that where we can, but often people have a local connection to 3 or 4 boroughs, including this, in which case we can't refer. And we have to treat them all exactly the same in line with the Housing Act. So they're all given the same assessment, they're all given the same tests, I'm afraid. Yeah, I mean, on social housing side, obviously we do. There's a 6-year residency criterion. Yeah.
Chris, on fire capital procurements, obviously we didn't start purchasing housing stock through PHI deliberately thinking about the homelessness implications. The fact that we procured 170 odd units over the last 3 years has obviously been of tremendous benefit, but it wasn't done intentionally because of the homelessness boom the country's experiencing. So in many ways, accidentally, we are ahead of the curve. So my question is, are we concerned that when we ride out the current bulge we have had in stock because of PHI, are we going to suddenly discover we're in the same difficult position like Hastings Borough Council, who constantly are rumoured to be considering a 114 notice purely around the issue of the revenue implications of homelessness?
I'll take that if I may, Chair, because I think some of this predates Chris. So the FI programme started as general needs. That was the phase 1. The second phase was solely focused on temporary accommodation. It wasn't accidental. There was a proper business case for the temporary accommodation cost that we could save by having our own portfolio of properties that we would temporarily use as temporary accommodation, because we see this is the premise of the situation. So that's just to clarify that one. Are we going to be finding ourselves in a similar situation as Hastings and others out there struggling overspent? We're doing everything we can not to. You might be aware this is part of our savings proposal for the next financial year. We are hoping to buy another 20 properties, and with any luck we are hoping to be buying 20 each year to carry on growing our general needs stock and then turning some of the units temporarily again into TA accommodation, because that's where at the moment the pressure is the greatest. We are constantly reviewing our budgets, our sort of revenue lines of budget. We have got obviously good grant funding, and we're using it to the maximum, I think, allowable within that. So we're taking all of the possible steps to mitigate and to manage that risk. We are at the moment, as is stated in Chris's report, forecasting an overspent of over 400,000, which we think in circumstances with a relatively small budget, because as you know the budget savings that we delivered last year effectively mean that from the year after you get a smaller base budget to begin with. So we are sort of doing absolutely utmost to control it and not to get into that position. I think lastly what I would say, overall investment in housing stock or in stock is seen as a kind of good type of investment, and we are having approaches from all sorts of sources. For example, Councillor Retzel the other day forwarding on information of organisations, investors, individuals willing to actually work with us and come up with some sort of models, initiatives to actually help us with that. There is a lot of institutional sort of capital in the circulation due to the sort of ageing population. A lot of pension funds actually looking for stable investments in housing, and social housing being seen as one of them. So I think with every sort of crisis, as this clearly is a housing crisis, across the country, there are always some kind of glimmers of hope and initiatives that you wouldn't necessarily be thinking of. The innovation really kicks in when you're under pressure. So I'm hopeful that by having those conversations, maybe something will come out of at least one or two of them, and it will put us even in a better position to do so.
Without it looking like I'm trying to poke holes, is there a concern that the success of the fire purchasing approach could end up as a double-edged sword? I think about when I worked for the Member of Parliament for Southend East, one of the principal reasons that homelessness became such a problem in Southend was because Southend had a number of pretty excellent charities when it came to dealing with homelessness, and as such it did act as a draw to the city, or to the borough as it was at the time. Is there a concern that our purchasing of fire properties has been very well publicised? We are doing a pretty good job with homelessness. Is there a concern that the double-edged sword could be that Thurrock is seen as not destination of choice, quote unquote, but something along those lines, victim of your own success?
I think it's a really valid point, and I think Chris's predecessor and I had those conversations, but it wasn't about the purchases, because at the end of the day the purchases were just growing housing stock. So it's not always going to be temporary accommodation. These are our units, and we will just be placing our tenants that are our residents that are on just waiting lists. So it's not just aimed at homelessness. There was a different kind of worry that we have had. Thurrock is, and we are working very closely, as you probably are aware, across a number of systems as a part of integrated really solution. So we wrap around a lot of support around people that come to us. So at some point, and as you will recall, probably two reports prior to this one, we were doing update on homelessness, which was the everybody in, which was the sort of the program run during COVID period. So our worry is that we are actually a really good organisation well integrated across the system, and that might be the pool where people know that we will actually help them, because we truly want to help them. We want to embed them in community. So I would be more, I mean, if we were talking about concerns, that was the area that we focused on as officers. I am not worried about growing portfolio. Obviously, we call it purchase, but in terms of purchases, these are outright purchases. We are the owners of those properties. They are just literally the search agents, and then they undertake capital works into those properties, and then obviously we put our residents in them. So that's just growing stock, and it doesn't even counter year on year, although it might be actually slowing down at the moment, the properties we're losing through right to buy. So overall, we're kind of on, breaking even, or just about on that.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce?
Thank you, Chair. Can someone tell me a little bit more about the rent insurance scheme, please?
So effectively what it is it's backed by Royal Sun Alliance, so it's backed by one of the biggest insurers, and we would pay 1 year's annual fee for the insurance for the landlord. It covers up to £2,500 worth of rent per month for the period of the tenancy. So should they fall into arrears, any amount of that rent which would be ordinarily payable through benefits would be covered by the insurance. And you can have an ongoing claim. The landlord does all the claim themselves. We give them access to the system so that they can do it all themselves. And if they extend the tenancy beyond the 12 months, then we basically hand it over to them. They make the payment further from there. There's no claim costs that we would be on the line for. And they also cover legal costs. So should there be issues in the tenancy around the need to evict, or even the need to have discussions around repayment plans and those kinds of issues, and disrepair, then those costs will be covered as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy, Councillor Pearce?
That's it, thank you.
Any other questions? Brilliant. Christopher, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I managed to log myself out. Right, homelessness prevention rough sleeping strategy. Ryan, diving straight in. Yeah. Ryan.
Your turn now.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm here to present this kick-off report for the Homelessness Prevention Rough Sleeping Strategy. It is a statutory duty for every local authority to have such a strategy. The last one was published for Thurrock in 2020. January 2020 went to Cabinet. And we're getting to the point now where that information, that strategy needs to be refreshed. This is the first part of that process, really, to come and explain to you what it is that we're intending to do, the process of it. So Chris has just spoken about some of the challenges that we're experiencing, some of the factors that are affecting service delivery, that are affecting residents in Thurrock, residents coming to Thurrock. And this will really set our approach for the next 5 years from 2025. If I broadly just talk about the work that we will be doing rather than touch too much on matters of homelessness. The first part of this work is going to be undertaking a review of homelessness and compiling an evidence base, looking at multiple factors, national context, the local strategic context, and the local housing context as well. Using all of this information, we'll gather a really clear picture of exactly what is going on in the local authority regarding homelessness across its many forms and causes. The next thing that we would do from that evidence base is actually move on to develop the strategy itself, absolutely identifying main causes of homelessness, the challenges and barriers that residents face, the key priorities that we need to be adopting to address and relieve homelessness across the borough. Also, really importantly, perhaps ever increasingly important, is linking the work for this strategy with some of the other overarching strategies that are in the council. The health and wellbeing strategy for one, Better Care Together Thurrock, Case for Further Change, the housing strategy. In our new models, our new ways of working, that integration and looking at Thurrock as localities rather than as services is really the way that we are looking to move forward. Absolutely the approach that we'd seek to follow with engagement for this strategy mirrors that we've done with the housing strategy. It's conversations, really getting to what matters most to residents and partners. It's not something for us to deliver on our own as a local authority. And absolutely, as elected members, you have a part to play in helping us shape the direction of the strategy going forward as well. That's really all I'd like to say in introducing this paper and kicking off the work. Very happy to take any comments or thoughts that you may have at this point, and going forward, look forward to engaging with you further.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Comments, questions? Councillor Redsill?
That's quite a lot, Ryan, isn't it? Nearly 4,000 on that list, you know, of approaches. It's quite a lot. Are we still putting service personnel in front of everything? Because there was that went through, kind of. Yeah, Councillor Holden and I was instigated that. I just still want to see that they are, you know, if they are homeless, which I don't think comes up that often, does it? They are still in the front and still given priority. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, obviously we do. Yeah, we do have in-person staff and all the rest of it to make sure that we do interview them and assess them properly. And on the housing register, they're given varying levels of priority dependent on which duties are owed. But yes, they are given reasonable preference.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you. What's the chances of us getting that figure down, Ryan?
That's a question.
Well, I like.
I mean, households. I think I've made this point many times at this committee. Every household, every resident has a housing need. Housing need can change in an instant. It can change overnight. It can change for so many reasons. As a local housing authority, the duties we have, the work we do, we absolutely try and support and bring the number down. But there is so much more to what that number is. You know, there's lots of people who have a housing need at a point in time and submit an application, and their circumstances change for the better, but that doesn't necessarily get reflected straight away. So I would focus less on that number and actually more on the outcomes that are delivered to the households that do come to us for support, and we do support really, really successfully. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Redsill. Any other comments? Ryan, it's more of a general comment. I appreciate the fact we get to comment on it at a very early stage. I think one of the things that I find disquieting as a member when I report homelessness concerns and rough sleeping concerns is that I don't always feel I'm totally across the detail in terms of what department has done what regarding a piece of casework. So I know you have internal processes, but from my point of view, if I think about the last homelessness case I reported about 3 or 4 months ago, it was a gentleman who was living in a vehicle. Now, I had a homelessness response, which was perfectly adequate. I was told that the homelessness team went out and engaged with him. It then took me several weeks to actually ascertain, have mental health spoken to him, have adult social care. Eventually, I was told mental health had engaged. No one could tell me if that was EPUT as our contracted end service user, or whether or not it was Thurrock Council staff through Thurrock First. So one of the things that I would like to see through a strategy is that when we report homelessness concerns, that members are perhaps better reassured regarding the suite of services that have seen someone. I know when you say homelessness, you probably use it in a rural term, as in you understand all the services that involve. From our point of view, when we see homelessness, all we actually see is the housing service. So if the strategy could perhaps embed just providing that reassurance regarding what the pathway is, that would be helpful for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that came to my mind as you were speaking really is going forward, the new operating model for the authority, looking at locality and integrated working, it becomes less and less about which service has done what and more about the support that's being offered. More broadly, the aim is absolutely that more support is able to be offered by fewer officers and fewer touch points. Not saying less staff, but having that individual, that person experiencing homelessness, have to be accessing more and more front doors, having more and more referrals. It's about cutting that down. So I guess the important thing perhaps as as elected members is knowing that the right support is there rather than the right services are there. But absolutely, the vision for this strategy, along with the case for further change, health and wellbeing strategy, housing strategy, is absolutely about doing that. I don't know if, Chris, you want to add anything closer to the detail, but
the detail, I think I remember the case that we're talking about. Just on that specific case, it was largely housing led, and they do tend to be. Specifically around rough sleepers, we have the rough sleeper coordinator who acts sort of like a local area coordinator and pulls those services in. So it is housing led. Mental health are involved, but we have our own mental health worker who works alongside us, and she's able to access records and make sure that they get seen by the right people. The rough sleeper coordinator also brings in soup kitchen, food parcels, and drug and alcohol services within. And now that we have the complex housing intervention project, we also have those people who are actually working sort of within, between services, but within services. So that coordinator is pulling that all in. So it's a housing-led effort.
Councillor Rinso.
Yeah, Chair's just brought up something that was going through my. I think when we start talking, we start thinking of things that we perhaps should say. How much do you actually go into people's background? I don't want to say too much on here as we're on camera and we're I don't want to talk about anybody, but if when we have somebody that's homeless that isn't really homeless, how far do we check that out?
We have a statutory duty to make really very specific inquiries around. We have to satisfy ourselves that they are homeless. And that means making inquiries not just with the individual, but also we do use Experian for credit checking and checking for addresses, Land Reg to check for any addresses that they might be linked to, and we'll also check with council tax if they're linked to any council tax accounts. The only real difficulty we have is when people might potentially own something abroad, because it's almost impossible to check if they don't tell us. But otherwise, we are very stringent in those checks, because if anyone has any accommodation they could use anywhere in the world, they're not homeless.
You probably know why I asked that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Any other? Councillor Pearce.
Thanks, Chair. We used to keep a number of voids. I don't know who. Is it you I talked to, Chris, or is it? It's you. We used to keep a number of voids for emergencies. Do we still do that?
No, there's not voids set aside for that type of purpose. I think if emergencies come up, if there is a need, then we react as best we can in the stock that we have. But there aren't properties sitting vacant specifically for just in case something comes up.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Wonderful. Well, Ryan, we look forward to the strategy progressing. Thank you very much. I think we're on to best value now, aren't we? Best value and service benchmarking. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. So I will start introducing the report, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Chris, who will go through the nice part around the benchmarking. So the report essentially has been derived to try and sort of set out what good looks like, following members sort of requesting that sort of level of detail. And so the report goes on to touch on how in which we manage contract fluctuation on a monetary value within the two main contracts that we have, which is the response repairs contract and our transforming homes contract. So if I just start on there, as the report sort of sets out under 2.3, it's in terms of monetary value, it's very difficult for us to ever draw a like-for-like comparison against other social housing providers in relation to the rates that we pay for our works and services, whether that's actually best value in terms of a sort of transactional measure against what someone else pays, because there's so many factors built into that price of when we obviously get that through a procurement exercise, and that depends on obviously our locality in terms of a borough, but also our stock, the different archetypes we've got in our stock, and also the service and the specifications that we're seeking, because they are specific to the requirements of our stock and our residents as well. And so in terms of us sort of achieving best value at procurement exercise, we can give absolute assurance to members that we achieve best value for a procurement exercise. because we go to market under competition for our main contracts, and that will be either via open market procurement, such as what we're undertaking at the moment for the future of the works of the service, or we utilise frameworks, which is a select number of contractors in the sector for a specific discipline of works that we're trying to seek. So any tender that we do is built up of a quality and a price split, which is out of 100%, and that price and quality split, it ranges. It could be 50-50, it could be 60-40, 70-30, etc., and that will be determined to best fit the services or the works that we're actually trying to seek, because value isn't just about the monetary aspect of what we pay out, it's also about the residents and the service that they receive through the work activity. Having any work undertaken in your home is very disruptive, and the journey that residents go through in doing that, it's absolutely key that we get that right, and that's part of the quality aspect. So under section 3, this really just sort of gives members the overview of how we manage the rate fluctuation within the contract of the main response repairs contract, which has been in place since 2015. It's currently in its final year. Over the term of the contract, and under 3.3, it sets out the mechanism under the contract, under 3.2 and 3.3, sorry, sets out the mechanism of which is the entitlement for the contractor provider that they're under. But that, even though it's an entitlement, it's not a given that they're just awarded that. Then it goes into a negotiation phase, and in the graph set out under 3.4, that shows that through that negotiation, that collaborative working that we've had with the current responsible repairs provider, actually over the term, we've in effect achieved a saving of around £950,000, of which has been reinvested back into our housing stock. And so it could only be achieved if you've got a very good open and collaborative working relationship with the contracting partner, and we absolutely have. And 3.5 also touched on some key statistics, in which obviously we're very pleased about, and me as the current provider are very happy about, that 55% of the workforce currently working on the contract are residents of the borough, and also 35% of the supply chain is from within borough as well. Moving on to the main Capital Works contract, which is what is commonly known as Transforming Homes. The two can't be compared like for like, and that's essentially just because the term and the work streams undertaken that and the values are vastly different. So therefore, the ability to achieve such savings is just not there. But it gives an overview around how we sort of manage that, and again, it's based on an industry recognised cost information service through the BCIS. And so at this point, I'll hand over to Chris to talk about benchmarking. Okay.
Thank you, Alistair. So just a bit of background in terms of the benchmarking. So the regulator of social housing has kind of created a new system for assessing how well social landlords are doing at kind of providing good quality homes and services. And in addition to new consumer standards, there's also a suite of tenant satisfaction measures, which are measured in two ways really. They're measured either with landlords' management information, or they're measured through a tenant perception and satisfaction survey. So at mid-year this financial year, we were invited to submit our data to participate in a benchmarking exercise with Housemark. 189 landlords in total participated in the exercise, and each landlord was placed into a peer group of kind of comparable landlords. So our peer group was defined as South Central local authorities and arm's length management organisations with less than 10,000 stock, and there was 42 landlords in that particular peer group. In late 2023, the quartile results were provided to us, and they indicate how the council compares with other providers, and those quartiles, basically the median that you see on those graphs is the middle value, so the very middle value in the range of all of those different providers in the peer group, and the quartiles split that kind of peer group into 4 equal parts, with the best performing landlords in quartile 1 and the landlords with the lowest values in quartile 4. So several of the TSMs are either linked to or relate directly to the contracts and services delivered by the contracts referred to in the report, and they provide a yardstick which kind of gives you a view of what good looks like. And as you can see from the graphs provided in the report, the council does actually compare quite well in relation to its peers across a number of those measures, and very well in relation to a few. So that demonstrates very strong performance in relation to those TSMs, and gives that yardstick of what good looks like. Would you like to conclude?
Thank you, Chris. So the report hopefully gives members some reassurance in relation to the way in which we're performing and sort of benchmarking. As Chris sort of set out, this is an active reflection of how we're performing against other landlords within the same sort of grouping of as us. And so moving forward, as of April this year, this will be a mandatory return that we have to then provide. And so these statistics will be provided to members as we move forward as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Councillor Redsill?
Put Chris on the spot now. What does good look like? Because I'd just read it. We all know what this is, but people watching are going to think, my God, what the hell is all that? Because they wouldn't understand, I don't think, a lot of them, of what it. So I think sometimes a little bit more plain speaking in there might be good for people watching from home, just to see what good is like, what fair is like, and everything else.
Okay, in terms of your question, in terms of what good actually looks like, in the graphs you can see on the report, so they represent each TSM in turn, and the bold line in the middle represents the median value. So anything below the median value, the council is operating within the bottom 50% of providers in the peer group, and anything above that median value represents the council performing in the top 50% of providers. Anything above the quartile 1 line, which is the dotted line towards the right of the graph, of each graph, represents quartile 1, and any performance above that particular line shows that the council is performing in the top quartile of performers in the peer group, which is very good. So in terms of what good looks like, anything above the median line is good, and anything above the quartile 1 line is very good.
Thanks, Chris. That'll make people feel a lot better at home. Thank you for that.
Councillor Diard.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I've read all the stats and I'm quite impressed with what you've produced. Is it right for me to say that this is more of a customer services survey to see how our customers feel about the service? Because I think I was looking more for value for money information, and I know that's extremely difficult, and I know if you produce something and you compare us with another local authority, it's a bit like comparing apples with pears. But if you do that, it does give you an opportunity to say, well, you know, why are we different? Why is that? You know, and if you can come up with the reasons, that's fine. So I was more interested in the sort of financial side. I knew we were getting good results from our tenants, but I would be interested in the financial side as well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so I think the first part of the report attempts to kind of address the financial side of the kind of question really, and I think the second part of the report kind of looks to address the what good looks like part of things, and whether we're performing well against other landlords in terms of that benchmarking and that comparison, and not just other landlords like for like landlords, actually comparable landlords too. To answer your first question around whether it's a kind of customer services survey, the TSMs are kind of two. They can be divided in two, really. So some are measured via a kind of tenant perception survey, it's called. What that is, it's not a transactional survey. So, for example, the repairs measures you see on that particular, on the report, particularly around satisfaction, they're not transactional measures. The tenants that answered questions and provided ratings for those measures weren't contacted relating to a specific repair. They were contacted at random and asked for their perception of the repairs service over the last 12 months if they'd received a repair in the last 12 months. So it is a perception survey and not a transactional survey. So hope that's answered your questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments? Chris, I assume that for the other local authorities, especially our peer groups, they have to format data in exactly the same way. So there's no element of match fixing where we all agree that we're going to land at a certain percentile point.
Absolutely not. So alongside the TSMs, there is a set of technical requirements that each local authority, ALMO, housing association has to kind of comply with. So for each measure, there's a very, very distinct set of technical requirements. They range from the response scale to the actual question as well. So the question can't be changed or altered in any way. The kind of flow of the survey. So some questions need to come first before other questions, so it is very, very stringently managed and provides a level playing field.
I noticed both yourself and Alice's little grin, almost as if you expected a max fixing question. Any final comments or questions? Councillor Chennick.
Yeah, within report, is there any information on people with disabilities and so forth, what come to housing and so forth?
Not specifically within this report. We do aim to survey a representative sample of our housing stock, which will include people with disabilities, providing feedback to us, but there's not necessarily any breakdown regarding that in this report.
Thank you.
Right, wonderful. Alistair, Chris, thank you both very much. I think that just leaves us with work plan and action log. First of all, I'll say the action sheet really is fantastic. Incredibly easy to follow, 11 months worth of meetings.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So in terms of the work programme, because it's an extraordinary meeting, so there's no work programme presented tonight. Obviously, there's one more meeting, I think, in March, isn't there? So that will look at the work programme then. And then any comments really on the action sheet that anyone has?
Evelina?
If I may, just on the action sheet, the number 11, that briefing note was sent in July last year, which was that Low on the Road local lettings plan that was sent by Ryan. And yeah, the rest is all fine. My other point, Councillor Halden, at the working group today, we just noted that, as members are aware, there is a review of open scrutiny function taking place at the moment, and there is a proposal for 3 scrutiny committees to be set up, place, people and resources with limited task groups. This is a working group, so I think the consensus we reached this afternoon is that we would like to keep that group going, but in whichever form the new overview scrutiny function will work, because we've all kind of agreed, officers and councillors, that it's the right thing to do to keep on overseeing that procurement exercise.
Yeah, it's an informal task, informal working group, so it's not bound by the strict limit on 2 formally constituted task and finish. So
yeah.
I think that's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, you stole my point.
It will only need to report back to the overview scrutiny for place, I would think, though, wouldn't it? Or
Yeah, it would just need to report back to the parent overview and scrutiny committee once its work was completed, just to kind of summarise what it's been doing.
Councillor Edson?
thank you.
I don't think it'll ever be completed, will it, really? Because it is ongoing, isn't it? It has to keep going, in my opinion. That's only my opinion, Evelina. That's
Well,
for
I'm
what it's
hoping,
worth.
I'm hoping that the procurement, the award of the contract and the start of the contract will be the end of the procurement working group.
Our
one
meeting
hopes.
last night that didn't end till 11:45. Housing took some praise, so I hope you listened to that. And housing got a little bit of praise there, which I thought was really good, especially with the HRA and what's happening in there. So it did get quite a bit. So listen to it and, you know, take something back from it. It's good. I only wanted to mention...
The whole thing. Listen to the whole thing.
Yeah.
For the next quiz.
Don't worry, he'll get his come up. That's what I mean. Oh, God. Just 21, when it says to remove note, it's still on most meetings we go to, it's still to note. You know, we need to take that out. I hate to note things. I don't know why I'm there, really, if I'm just to note it, because you could note it and get on with it. You know, I don't want to just note it. Thank you, Chair.
That's Lilliard.
Yeah. Just wondered, you know, you're sort of concerned about the Black Shots project as well. It's quite a big project, isn't it?
Bring that up.
No, you didn't bring it up.
No,
No, I am concerned about it. And I wondered whether it's worth tagging that on as a project for the working group in addition to the procurement. Do you think it's a big enough project that we ought to have an oversight of it to make sure that as politicians we're happy with the progress and stuff like that? Or do you think it is something which will detract from the main procurement project?
In other news, water, wet.
What I would say that there is already a steering group with councillors overseeing that project. So I think it's not necessarily an offshoot of over scrutiny per se. There is a steering group. We could look to review whether we've got sufficient membership there, because at the moment we have got an open invitation for the portfolio holder, and I think and yourself and Councillor Maney as the ward councillor. So perhaps we strengthen that group with other members, so we can take that away and consider, but that becomes a steering group as part of the project as opposed to working group as part of over scrutiny. That would be my proposal.
I think it is a big project, Evelyn. It's the biggest project I think we're ever going to do in Thurrock, ever. And I think, I think there's enough on that at the moment, but there's not any harm, because we sit on it, don't we? So I think there's not any harm for bringing an extra person in on it, just to sort of look at it, you know, because I think it is going to be a very big project. There's going to be some glitz, you know, there's bits I don't like, and there's bits that, you know, I want to change, but as you know, Evelyn, we're all shut up now.
Well, I think that Evelina said she was going to update members when you got to the point of dispensation from the Treasury to make so I think that will give you a natural reflection point, and you can consider the best way to move forward with the steering group then. Yeah, please.
So this is obviously, bearing in mind this is a formal meeting, but what we're doing at the moment is trying to see if we can actually go to Cabinet without the full answer having been received from Treasury as yet, whether we can go for a conditional decision with Cabinet. So we're exploring that. Should that happen, we are aiming for March Cabinet, which is, you know, to you and I tomorrow, pretty much. But you know, this is just a working idea that you know, to get ourselves ahead of, you know, should they say yes, so that we're ready to move on with the next stage, which would be the sort of appointment of contractor, working up the design and submission to planning, so we don't have to wait for the newly constituted administration and, you know, the further and all that. So, but that's an idea, but more to follow. But you're absolutely right, that will be the point at which we say, what else do we need in terms of oversight of that?
Cool, thank you very much. And we're all set for March. All papers are in order. There's no reason to expect anything. Cool. Brilliant. Okay, meeting closed at 8:10. Thank you all very much for your attendance.